history. We are at a very pivotal time in history. Whether the polar bear survives in the wild is truly up to us in these critical years. And the polar bear is the northernmost bear. It's the largest of the bears. The predictions now are for an ice-free Arctic Ocean as early as 2012. But that means a lot of difficulty for this bear. Now, just 2 years ago, scientists were saying we could see an ice-free Arctic Ocean as early as 2080. 1 year ago, they revised that to 2040, and what happened is last summer, there was such a record melt. 1/2 of the amount of ice that was left in 2004 was left in 2007, and it was such a huge melt that scientists have had to revise all predictions of climate change. And among those is the prediction of an ice-free Arctic Ocean now as early as 2012. And the polar bear have already experienced tremendous challenges as the ice has reduced in thickness by 42% in the last 40 years. And with that, the polar bear have reduced the average number of cubs they have by about 15% in the last 25 years. That according to the Arctic Impact Assessment with more than 300 scientists. Now the polar bear gets 98% of its diet from seal, and it depends upon the pack ice as a platform to hunt the seal. And as the pack ice has retreated, the polar bears have been stranded on shore, waiting for that ice to come when it normally would have been. Now it's weeks and even months before the ice gets there. Often polar bears are swimming out, when historically they would have not had to swim more than 15 miles at most from the shore of Alaska. They'd be able to rest on some ice. Now there's hundreds of miles of open water, and polar bear are drowning by the hundreds. Now the polar bear have also reduced their average weight by 15% in the last 25 years, the same reduction as the number of cubs. But the biggest change by far that we have seen so far for the polar bear is the number of bears that have their cubs on the ice compared to the number of bears that have their dens and their cubs on land. Historically, 90% of polar bears have their dens out on the ice. And as it has been thinning, though, that changed to where 20 years ago, 2/3 of polar bears have their dens on the ice, 1/3 on land. And now, just in the last 20 years, that's changed to where now only 1/3 of polar bears have their dens on the shrinking pack ice, 2/3 of polar bears now having their dens on land. And it is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge where they go primarily to have their dens. It's by far the densest denning ground of polar bears in North America. And so climate change has doubled the importance of protecting the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge as wilderness. Now, many people mistakenly think of the Arctic as a barren wasteland. This could not be further from the truth. The Arctic Ocean and the Arctic inland areas are full of life. And the life is dependent upon the pack ice. The phytoplankton live on the bottom of the pack ice, and that's what feeds the whole Arctic Ocean ecosystem. Like the harp seal, a baby harp seal shown here, a bearded seal shown here. These are endangered bowhead whales, and all are dependent upon the phytoplankton that grows thick on the bottom of the pack ice in the winter. And in the spring, when the ice retreats, it seeds the great Arctic Ocean, feeding krill and benthic organisms and Arctic cod, which feed beluga whale and narwhale, which has a unicorn-like horn, and killer whale. And also these sink and feed benthic organisms, or clams and mussels. And these feed walrus that swim to the bottom of the Arctic Ocean to feed on these organisms, but all is dependent upon the pack ice. As well, there's animals like the seal and polar bear, and also walrus and Arctic fox and other species that use the pack ice as a platform. It's their habitat. And from there they go and hunt, but they need that to rest. And without it, scientists are very concerned with what's going to happen to the Arctic environment. But it's not just the Arctic, as I'll show in this presentation. What happens to the Arctic affects the rest of the planet very directly and in a very major way. Now the inland areas of the Arctic too are full of life. This here shows the range of the porcupine caribou herd that is one of the last intact herds left in the world. And this caribou herd, which lives, this is Canada here, in the wintering range, they feed 17 Gwich'in villages, Native American villages that live off the caribou. The caribou migrate every spring crossing the Porcupine River. That gives this herd its name, the Porcupine Caribou Herd. And they cross the jagged peaks of the Brooks Mountain Range that are not shown on this map. And all massed together on the 1.5 million acre coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. That is the biological heart of this huge ecosystem the size of California, 100 million acres. And this shows the tens of thousands of caribou as they mass together on the coastal plain, giving birth to the next generation of caribou. And there's also 160 species of birds from 6 continents and all 50 states that go to breed on the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge. But this is what some lawmakers want to do with the refuge. We just defeated another attempt, well more than 100 attempts now, to destroy the Arctic Refuge that was defeated a few days ago because drilling would devastate this area. While some liars like our president claim it's only a 2,000 acre footprint, as you can see from this map, that simply is not the case. It would sprawl to fill up the 1.5 million acre coastal plain with thousands of miles of roads and pipelines, hundreds of toxic pits, living quarters for thousands of people, and undoubtedly hundreds of oil spills a year, as we see at Prudhoe Bay. It would be a massive industrial infrastructure that would destroy both the wildlife and wilderness character that makes this place so unique. Now, I began my first journey through the Arctic Refuge at Prudhoe Bay. This is the northern terminal of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. They've dredged enough gravel to fill 90,000 football fields to a height of 3 feet for all the roads and development around Prudhoe Bay, causing massive devastation. Now, the oil companies would not allow me to do this trip, but I did get permission from the state of Alaska, but the oil companies still illegally tried to stop me. I had to get by their security and out into the wetland tundra where they did not follow me. And I had to bring a raft to get across the rivers like this, the Saginaw River that flows through Prudhoe Bay. And so I had a massive backpack of 90 pounds and still could only take about 10 days of food for the 90-day trip. So I was dependent upon the land for the bulk of my diet, primarily through fish and also roots and berries and greens. And this shows my pack in the Saginaw River. You can see how wide it is, why I needed that raft. And this is eating lunch on an island in the Saginaw River with the ever-present cranes and oil industry blight in the background. And you sure notice the industry. You don't even have to be looking. All you have to do is take a breath. The air pollution there exceeds that of Washington, D.C., and the nitrogen dioxide levels are twice that of Washington, D.C.